after I got sober, less than a year after I got sober, I got very, very sick with a stomach parasite that wiped out my gut and my immune system, which we, now know are one and the same. I'd always been someone who could use willpower, who could force their way through things. That comes from athletics, that comes from something inside of me. When I got sick, that was no longer an option. This instability, this brain fog, this lack of energy, it really led to me having to just stop for the first time in my life. And as a wonderful therapist said to me, it forced me to stop being a Viking, right? Like I could no longer Viking my way through life. Literally Viking as a verb, right? Like push and just go. And I think, in retrospect, it's what I needed because it pushed me to this place of a softer approach to life. The yogic approach and the pause and the value of rest and the value again of less, and that being fully present energetically, physically is much more important, even if that's for one thing, than doing 10 things and not really being present to any of them.
Peter Anderson, I could not be more thrilled to have this conversation with you today. I think just to kind of provide context for our relationship, we actually just met about 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And I met you in a yoga studio that I had tried for the first time called Child's Pose here in LA. And I signed up on ClassPass and just kind of popped in. And I think you might remember when I showed up, I didn't even remember what kind of yoga class it was. I didn't know if it was yin. I actually didn't remember.
It's like, I'm here.
So, yeah, and then you were there, and it was
too,
just
brother.
a wonderful, wonderful class. It wasn't the hot one that I've been doing, and so it was more actually about the practice of yoga and the mechanics that you were so helpfully like giving guidance on. And basically by the end of it, I said that was probably the best instructed class that I've been to in yoga, and I've been to quite a few. In that I was admiring and aspiring to your physique, which is like you're an athlete. And so
thank you.
the
Thank you
men's
for all
yoga
that.
kind of thing is something that we'll talk a little bit about because in your athletic background and bringing yoga practice into your life is a complementary practice for you to also be great at other things. So I would love to sort of officially welcome you to the show. Thank you so much for carving out time to be here with me today.
Of course, yeah. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here. Thanks for that generous introduction.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so as I've gotten to know you, and just like some of the other folks that I've gotten to know in really kind of fast succession over the last few weeks and months, I sort of get this sixth sense that you've got a story. You're a remarkable person. You're someone that I would very much label a quiet leader, which is why we're sitting here today. So let's bring people up to speed on your story. Let's start with where you came from and what your upbringing was like, and then we'll transition into kind of the early kind of professional experiences.
Originally, I'm from a small town in Montana, 1,000 people, right next to Yellowstone National Park. So that type of place, that type of environment is very profound in its own right. And as a child, sometimes I say, and it holds true, we were more worried about grizzly bears or wild animals coming through our front yard than any sort of, crime or any sort of cultural issue, if you will. I didn't realize this till much later in life, but the natural environment, the power of nature really has and holds a profound place in me as well. That said, I left home at 16. I left with the support of my family. I wasn't getting in trouble. I left to pursue bigger things. I'd outgrown this town of 1,000 people, and I was very fortunate to have a family who supported that, and also to have basically extended family friends who had known me and my mom since she was a teen. they took me in Salt Lake City, Utah. And that really pushed me forward, both as a young man who needed to be responsible to himself. They weren't my parents. They weren't checking on me, if you will. But it also pushed me forward athletically, especially at that time as a teen. I was very, very driven by athletics, specifically football and basketball. I moved to Salt Lake City, ended up causing a bit of a upheaval within this community at the high school. Took over, starting middle linebacker spot for the senior year after this group of kids had grown up together.
Oh, wow.
And
yeah.
they didn't like that so much.
You get your tires punctured out.
Yeah. Getting like literally phone calls to the administrators that I shouldn't be there and all sorts of stuff. So that was huge. It was huge to be able to move so quickly as a young person and to really have responsibility put on my shoulders to show up. After that, I ended up playing college football for really just a short time at a school in Idaho called Idaho State University. There were talks, probably the opportunity to go back to Salt Lake City where I finished high school and play at the University of Utah, but that didn't take hold, didn't take shape. I'd injured my ACL twice, 2 ACL tears in my left knee. And really it was more so this slow kind of transition and boiling up of these questions of like, what is this attitude around sport? I love the sport itself, training, eating, the camaraderie, the fun, but without understanding it at the time, I really did not like what we would now call toxic masculinity and the sort of arrogance and ego in football specifically, and a lot of young men thinking they were God's gift to this world because they played football. More or less, I walked away. I left, I went home to Montana, and, now looking back on it, shortly after that, I found out what it was to be depressed for the first time. You lose something that means so much to you, or you give up on it, and it's hard to create that again. It takes a lot of time. What that did do is it allowed me to search and find many, many things that I do enjoy and still enjoy. I mean, we can fast forward from there to New York. That would be skipping a large portion, a very important portion of my life, spending, 3 years in Paris, France, living there, working in fashion, nightlife, learning a language to a fluent level, really discovering a global culture, lots of things. That ended up getting me to New York, staying in the fashion and nightlife worlds for some time, but that pushed me to really the brink of darkness.
As a 16-year-old kid with a family friend that is taking you in, but in a way, it sounds like they're not fully, assuming the parental role. And so wanting to learn more about like how you manage to, as you say, take responsibility and put on your shoulders the part about showing up, for example, the part about being the person you want to be, the athlete you want to be, the friend, the colleague, well, I suppose not colleague, but certainly in the community that was now way bigger than what you're used to. So like, was that all a self-reliant experience in a way? Or even though self-reliance is something that I think is actually largely not true for the vast majority of people, but there are some times where we are self-reliant, and wanting to learn, like, did you have role models, coaches, idols, even if you didn't know them, that it could have been reading, for example, reading about a certain leader or certain person, certain athlete, that was the model that got you to shoulder that responsibility?
Yeah, very good question. I think really what it was the people, who took me in Salt Lake City, the family with whom I'm still close, with their kids and their kids. there was just a lot of mutual respect, right? And I think at that time in my life, again, maybe or perhaps without understanding that, it was like, you know, I'm a kid, I'm 16, but they're showing me respect. They're allowing me to be me. They're giving me a chance, as did my parents, to go out and you know, prove myself, which I had always wanted to do. You know, I didn't, I don't think I ever really felt like I needed to prove myself to anyone but myself. And that's kind of an interesting difference compared to a lot of other people I still know. I've understood now that my motivations in life are very much intrinsic, where a lot of other people, and you know, whether it's in athletics or business or culture, LA, New York, Paris, you know, motivation is extrinsic, right? It's what's external, what can I compare myself to, how can I be better than. I just like to push.
Yeah.
I like
we're simpatico in that way.
Yeah. I like I enjoy intense experiences. You know, and I always have, whether that was, you know, moving at 16, racing, you know, motocross starting when I was 10.
Yeah, that's fun.
I've done so many things that, you know, use my body and brain and athletic undertakings. I still I mean, I laugh, as a, you know, yoga teacher in LA. One of my real true guilty pleasures is still watching Supercross and motocross.
We're gonna have to have you over. And we'll do that at some point.
Yeah, that's
eventually
we'll
do that on the Vision Pro. Maybe someone will wear a GoPro and we'll watch a lot. Because I grew up riding dirt bikes as well, and big into motorsports. I snowmobile, several go-karts.
Montana was like, for me, you know, people ask, oh, did you ride horses, this and that? I was like, no, I rode dirt bikes and then snowmobiles in the winter.
Yeah, I always wanted a quad. My parents wouldn't let me get one. It's a dream that at some point I'm buying a quad.
Yeah, I'm not much of a nostalgic person, but the motorcycles make me very nostalgic.
How did that family, and do you want to call them by their name? We can sort of refer to them.
Yeah, of course. I mean, they are the Groth family.
So how did they, as a 16-year-old kid, show you that respect that you internalized in a way that made that kind of, you know, validated your own kind of individuality and kind of agency in a way that allowed you to take then responsibility to do things that were, like, as you said, intrinsic?
There was a lot of guidance, you know, but there was never I was never told what to do, you know. I think the guidance factor is very important, you know, knowledge, sharing of knowledge, but then allowing someone to figure it out on their own. And that, to me, I mean, to this day, is very important. I love sharing, I love knowledge, I love being guided and learning, but I also still very much like to figure it out on my own. And I will admit that I still have a hard time being told what to do or what I should know or shouldn't know.
I can relate to that.
Yeah, and I think that's really what it was. It was just these people, the Groth family, even my parents too, and the extended family. A lot of people were very much there for me if I needed. I knew that. It's trust, right? Like, I trusted that they were there if I needed. And that actually gave me the space mentally and physically to, like, explore who I am and who I was at that time. And that trust is huge, you know. That's a very big part of that learning experience was, and thus trusting myself, right? And the way you trust yourself is basically you show up for yourself, right? You do the things that you say you're gonna do, because you could tell everyone in the room, wherever it may be, maybe it's your partner, you know, your wife, your husband, your kids, your family, you could lie to them. They're gonna believe you because they trust you. But if you're lying to yourself, you know it, and that intrinsic trust will never be there. That's what showing up is, I think, is like you show up for yourself, and likely you're gonna show up for everyone else, because it does start with us on a singular level.
I have a lot to say about the the way we educate people to think that like the system is like the thing that we're all getting pulled into. But to be kind of like a Renaissance man, to be into art and also athletics, to be into literature and also, you know, hip hop or something. It's like that. I love people like that because that colors in your life and you become an interesting person.
Yeah, I love that as well. And that's something I've really, I would say, leaned into in the last few years and really accepted as part of who I am, you know, because going back to being a, you know, young athlete all the way back in Montana, I have a very vivid memory of learning to play the drums. You know, I already played the piano and trumpet, wanted to also play the drums. I remember being in the music room, you know, learning, teaching, trying to teach myself to play the drums. And, you know, an adult, a parent coming into the room and pulling me out of the room to come play basketball, which, I mean, I understand now because I grew up in, you know, this town where I grew up in Montana. It's 1,000 people. It was a K through 12 school. There were only, you know, so many people who could play. I mean, they wanted everyone to play, right?
Right.
But it sort of, I think, planted this seed that was like, oh no, I need to be like that role. You know, I need to be the athlete, not the creative.
Interesting.
And the creative side of me got pushed away for quite some time. You know, I found that again in college after I stopped playing football. I took to photography and started, you know, shooting a lot of photos, ended up working for some like small magazines and things like that, but just really finding this creative outlet again. And if we fast forward to now, I very much use that creativity through my teaching, right? You know, creating sequences, delivery of cueing and just connecting with people, right? Every experience is creative if you allow it to be new rather than coming in with some preconceived notion of like what you want or what you need. You know, creativity doesn't have to be a masterpiece on the wall.
Yeah,
like we are creative
coming from someone
beings.
who's learning pottery and
Like it can be, but
it's
it's hard, you know. And I have so much respect for people who just go out and create, whether that's a podcast or through writing or a business or with paint or ink, anything
or
in
as
between.
a teacher, as a coach,
or
as a mentor,
teacher,
in a yoga studio.
Like, you know, that's what this big brain of ours does, right? That's why we are so prolific in this world, because we can create, we can imagine. I just think it's unfortunate, as you mentioned, that there are systems in place that make us think that that isn't who we are. Like we're all creative. We're just made to think that you're only creative if it looks or feels or maybe sounds a certain way.
Julie Cameron's written this book called The Artist's Way. Are you familiar with that book?
I am, yeah.
It's terrific. What's been your experience, or like what do you think is the message in that book, and what was your experience with sort of engaging with it?
I think it's kind of interesting that it's almost teaches us how to get out of our own way, to, you know, through the writing, through the pages, through the almost reframing how we view things through a more wide open lens rather than this lens of, you know, should be this way or that way. It removes like blockages, you know, it removes layers that we have constructed over years, whether that was consciously or not, you know. And that's, I mean, it's very much for me what the practice and teaching of yoga is as well, right? Like we know yoga as, or most of us know yoga as like yoga asana, right? Get on your mat, do your physical practice. But it's, you know, it's so much more than that. And one of the foundational pillars of the practice, like we take these shapes with our body, we create these shapes with our body, so that we can get all those shapes, that structure out of our mind and let that creativity flow freely.
I love that. Yeah, there's a lot to say on all that, and I'll make a couple comments on a couple ideas or thoughts so that people can, at home, can like follow some of the things that Julie Cameron sort of endorses. So there's two that kind of stick out to me as particularly important and powerful, and one that's especially core, which is morning pages.
Yeah.
So even, you know, and what's so great, so it's basically this exercise where the first thing you do when you wake up, ideally, that's why it's called morning pages, not evening, although you could do both, and some people do, or you could do evening if it works better for you. But in the morning when you've just woken up and before you pick up your phone, before you engage with your email, before you read the news, to just have a stream of consciousness that you write for 3 pages. And there are plenty of times I do it where I don't even need my eyes open. Like if I'm doing it, and let's say it's dark, I can just kind of like go like this, and your unconscious will start surfacing, as you said, which, as we know, it's like 80 or so percent of our brain is unconscious. So 20% is the thing that we all think is the kind of the thing that really is how we relate to the world in a lot of ways. But the thing that's running the show is deeper than that. And psychedelics showed me that, breath work has shown me that, yoga and other things have shown me that. But that's thing one that she recommends doing every day, and there's a whole program and prompts and other things. The other thing that's really special that my wife and I both do, and I certainly think about often when I'm not doing it as regularly as I should, but I certainly do it when I feel like I need a re-energizing kind of experience, is the artist date, which basically is you take yourself on a date to do something that you love in some way. So for you and me, probably it could be out in nature, going on a hike, taking the dogs for a run. Could be going to a museum and like really just spending time looking at what's there and thinking about it. It could be any number of things. You love cinema, go to the movies by yourself.
Yeah.
Go out for a nice dinner by yourself. Yeah. Like when you can do that, and I've done that, it's actually pretty great when you can be comfortable enough to do that and know that like you can like it's not even a reward. It's more like collaborate with your true self, basically, because that's always there. And I think people have like midlife crises, and they have, the thing where like the lie at some level, the thing that they have been thinking is the thing that is the thing for success and validation and approval, is actually they realize is so far away from, like going back to my thing about they're so far away from the true north that they get the red Corvette. And so
I would just offer, if you're gonna take yourself on the artist date, don't take your phone. Or leave it in the car whenever you're ready to go on a hike or dinner or view some art at a museum.
That's a really, really good point.
I only say that in terms of the artist date, like disconnect.
Yeah.
Do that for yourself.
Yeah.
Do that for yourself. That's like a gift in modern times.
I love that. So with that said, I'd like to maybe pick back up where we left off about your adventure from Utah to New York. Bring us back.
There's that's a span of, I moved to Utah when I was 16. I ended up in New York when I was 27. So that the decade plus 11 years in between, I studied in France, finished school in Utah, and then moved to Paris for an extended
what
amount.
level study at the undergrad level, or is this high school?
4-year degree at a couple of them at the University of Utah. And then, I vividly remember as well, a good friend of mine, he was doing his master's in psychology. He's a few years older than me, and we talked about like what the good life was going to be. I knew I was going to go to Paris and kind of live. And I thought I would do that for a few years, or a little while. I didn't really, but I did say, I was young, but I was like, okay, by the time I'm 30, I'm going to be here in Salt Lake City teaching French at this university. Wow. I'm going to have like a good professor's life. You teach, you learn.
At University of Utah.
Yeah, I thought like I really loved Salt Lake City. I still do.
It's a cool place,
At the time, I was like, man, this place is great. It's really nice quality of life. You can be outdoors. There's good music. There's good food.
They do.
Just enough of like kind of counterculture, progressive culture to be really interesting. Yeah, I thought I was going to go to Paris and then go back to Salt Lake and, get a master's, doctorate, and be a teacher. Well, I am a teacher now. I'm just not teaching French. I didn't go back to get a doctorate in French. I took a whole different route and ended up as a yoga teacher. But that during that decade, what I did was, so again, Salt Lake City to Paris.
Can I pause you there?
Yeah.
What was the draw to Paris other than the sense that you would, I think, as you said, start to live there? Like, what was it?
Good question. The first time I went to Paris, the first time I went to Europe was not long, very shortly after I stopped playing football, actually. So, there's your first sign, like, okay, something's coming. But I went on this whirlwind 17-day trip with my mom and my brother and a group of kids and a couple of chaperones from Montana, where I grew up. And I was just like intermediary chaperone because I knew all those kids, but I was older than them. And we did France, Italy, Spain in 17 days. And I just remember when we landed in Paris, it just like hit me. You know, literally, it was like, this is incredible. And even little things, going to the Louvre, you know, the museum and elsewhere, and being able to pick up like a few words of French that were similar to English, and it just lit a fire in me.
Wow.
You know. So I went back to Utah, started studying French, did a study abroad in Paris, back to Utah to finish school, then moved to Paris. Ended up moving to Paris on a work visa as an English teacher in 3 primary schools, three elementary schools.
The layers of your onion, man. Jeez, my goodness. I mean, we've had a number of chats now, but I'm so glad we're getting into this. Cause...
So I did that for a short time, only 6 months was the contract, but it gave me a visa for a year. That's when I very much fell into working in nightlife. You know, I'd never worked in nightlife, never had any desire to work in nightlife or the service industry, but I knew I wanted to stay in Paris, and I found a job through a friend from Denmark. She was hosting or waitressing at this new like underground high-end cocktail club. It was when like mixology was really just having a moment in the US and super, super new to France. And I basically went in just to work like as a bar back. And within a month, they had like trained me to be a cocktail bartender, you know, and we were like going at it, man. And when I say going at it, I mean, we were working hard and we were playing hard.
A lot of,
you know, at the same time, but at the same time, I was also working in the fashion industry, working at this super kind of niche, high-end store called Void a few days a week. And I was in the modeling industry, and I was very, very skinny and unhealthy skinny, and I was not sleeping, running 10K to run off the night before, going to work here, going like
you get the classic, man. You get recovered enough to do it again, basically.
Yeah, if that, you know, I mean, it wore on me, but for a long time, it was a lot of fun. A lot of fun. I mean, I look back on my time in Paris only with, you know, in high regard, and a friend from Paris, originally from Budapest, she is actually who brought me to yoga. You know, we met in the fashion world. She ended up becoming and is still a very successful, very talented, skilled yoga teacher based in Paris. She gets me in New York. She's in New York for what they call Jivamukti tribe, a New Year's celebration in New York City with Jivamukti, which was is a certain type of yoga practice. And I knew I needed a change. I was inching towards sobriety, but wasn't ready. You know, nightlife was too much, fashion was too much. She invited me to a yoga class in New York, and I was like, at that time, I knew nothing of yoga. Like I knew literally nothing. But I said yes.
Not even the occasional class, you would say.
I had taken one Bikram class, so you know,
that whole thing.
that doesn't count. Right. That's so no, I literally knew nothing.
Okay.
And went and had my mind blown. You know, my first yoga class, aside from one Bikram class, was turns out to be a 2-hour master class taught by David Life, who is one of the founders of Jivamukti Yoga. So basically, it turned the light back on. You know, I was in a dark place in New York with in my life. You know, drinking, partying. I was active, but you know, I was climbing, actually doing a lot of rock climbing, running. But like I said, that was just, you know, if this is the water, like it was just keeping me here. There was no progress. It was just keeping me from drowning.
I think you and I both know plenty of people that walk that line a long time.
Yeah.
And some go, you know, there's all kinds of tragedies I'm sure you and I both could speak to about that getting so out of control that it becomes an addiction, and it's no longer in the agency you have is there, and it's to an extent, but it's a way more difficult thing to pull out of. That requires a real commitment and decision, really. So we'll definitely get into that. But before we do, can you define that style of, or that practice of yoga that you just mentioned there?
Yeah, I can do my best. Jivamukti was created, developed in New York City by two partners, David Life and Sharon Gannon. And you know, they were in the very kind of cool scene, art scene, creative scene, downtown New York City. But really what it's based around, one of its main principles is ahimsa, or non-harming, you know? And in that sense, for them, that speaks to the non-harming of the earth and of others, plant-based, of course. But the practice itself very strongly rooted in Ashtanga yoga and also bhakti yoga. So devotional yoga, devotion to the higher power and to service, right? And that comes in service through the practice, service out in the world, and then a lot of chanting, kirtan. And that actually is one aspect of the practice that really drew me in. It was like bringing me back to that music moment, you know. It was like singing in groups before class, you chant and sing, and it just like the energy level, you know, again, it just turned things back on that I hadn't felt in such a long time. And I didn't, you know, I couldn't put all this into words at the time. But very quickly, you know, I went from a non-yogi to practicing, a lot, you know, 5-6 days a week. And it pushed me from January 2016 to October 2016. It pushed me to finally, you know, leap into sobriety. And throughout that year, I was jokingly saying, before I actually got sober, you know, I took like a month off, from cold turkey month, no booze, no drugs, still bartending, still working in fashion. But I was like, I got, you know, whatever I'm doing isn't working. So I was taking these bouts of sobriety, as I called them, but then I would get back into partying, and it would go deeper, right? And it would get darker and go harder. Right. And I would get sober again for a little longer and then go deeper. And really towards the end of that summer, I was in a lustful summer fling with someone who, she was very successful in the fashion modeling world, and, you know, had too much time, too much money, not a lot to do.
Yeah.
So it was a lot of fun, you know, but it,
double-edged sword.
Yeah, you know, that's when it actually pushed me to the brink. And there are moments that I still remember, even when I was, as we'd say, like off my rocker, you know, just completely gone. But I would come to this moment of clarity in my head, and it was like this light from the practice in me. And I would be so upset because I was like, it'd be like 5-6 a.m. It was serious partying, you know? And I would just look and be like, well, I'm definitely not going to make it to yoga tomorrow. Like, that sucks.
Letting yourself down.
Yeah, exactly. Letting myself down. And it just went, you know, a little further. And there were a chain of events that finally got me through some communication and good conversation with family members, and just a lot of things. It was, you know, I made this choice on a flight back to New York from a weekend long wedding that I don't remember because of my drinking. And I got on that plane and was like, all right, well, here's the, you know.
On the way back? Or
on the way back to New York from Seattle. And I was like, all right,
well,
here, basically. Like, well,
I've been there in a way.
These are going to be the last gin and tonics that I ever drink. And
you made that decision right there and then. No turning back.
Yeah.
Good for you.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about the rock bottom moment. If there is a particular moment and a particular, you're sort of describing the scene and the experience of kind of going to this wedding, having this kind of blowout final experience, which is not uncommon. And you and I both, what I want to know first is, was there, you mentioned your family and maybe other people being part of the conversation. Was there a kind of, any kind of, I don't know if ultimatum is the right word, but certainly people being like, telling you the thing that you were already telling yourself internally, but that they were being affected too?
Absolutely not.
No.
I was very good at hiding all those aspects of myself. No one, aside from my brother, knew how deep I was. They had no clue. I had to, at that wedding, I had to kind of admit where I was to get some help to kind of break out of this come down from New York that I was, experiencing in real time at that wedding. Not because I wasn't drinking, I was still drinking, but the last year in New York, especially, like, I developed a very heavy cocaine habit. I had always had a lot of too much fun with cocaine, but that went from, fun to like a problem and a reliance. And, you come off a, you come off a 10-day bender that was, happened because that was my life, to Montana, then Seattle, and like, you're not finding that stuff there, at least not safely.
Right.
But so I'm trying to drink my way through it, basically, and I was having a anxiety attack that lasted for days. And I finally asked my mom, and I don't know if I should share this, but I am. I mean, I trust her and she trusts me, but I was like, Mom, okay, this is gonna be a really crazy question, but you see how I'm not well. Like, do you have like a painkiller or Xanax or something? And she just like, what? What do you mean?
Is that bad?
Yeah. And I was just like, I'm not, I'm barely hanging on right now. Suffice to say, within the family who was there, we found some.
Right, yeah. We won't say name names.
Yeah.
This is if you found something that was found,
it was for help.
It was for help,
yeah. And
but that's part of it, right? Like, asking for that is part of it.
Yeah. You
and
do
even
have to ask
it
for
bridged
help,
you to where you needed to go.
And anyway, I took a Xanax. And I mean, it had to be a minute later at the most. I remember just going like,
wow, first time you took a deep breath.
Took a first deep breath in, over 2 weeks.
Wow.
And from there it was fun. The rest of the weekend was really fun. And I had more Xanax and more wine and gin and tonics and don't remember really any of it,
wow.
Aside from actually a couple conversations with some cousins who were there who were sober and one who had called me out. Like, what the hell is wrong with you, man? Like, you used to be so nice. She's like, New York really changed you. And I was like, wow, Britt, I'm still nice. I'm just, I'm really struggling right now.
So that's really interesting how they described you as you used to be so nice. So is that, because you're saying you were still nice, but they're saying, I don't know if they're saying that like the person you were is certainly shifting in a way that they didn't consider to be nice, in other words, good, or if you were being kind of like a little bit difficult as a person.
I think both. I think both in that moment. It was like I was not my best self, whatever that means.
Right.
But I was also, because I was, in the middle of a come down, an anxious come down. Like, I was not being a nice person in the moment either to anyone. I could barely talk, if I remember correctly. So the sort of jovial, laughing Peter that they knew was not present at the time.
So a few things. First is, what do you know about alcoholism itself?
For me, alcoholism runs deep in one side of my family. Addiction runs deep in that side of the family as well. If it's not alcohol, it's something else. And as we know now, you don't have to be addicted to a substance, right? It might be like Fox News or CNN or your phone, right? Like, there's just this information that's making, giving you dopamine hits, or the reward signal. Exactly. What I do know, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a researcher. What I do know, I've learned through sources like a lot of people in 2024, through Dr. Huberman's podcast, Gabor Mate, and really from just like a lot of self-reflection and kind of study on myself through those, through that work. What I remember learning that really hit me, that kind of like scared me, was the grooves you talked about, right? Those grooves get deeper and deeper. So how I looked at it was like, we need more to fill up those grooves as they get deeper. You need more alcohol, you need more Coke, you need more screen time, whatever. The problem is with the substance, right, is when you get sober, those grooves don't fill up, they don't heal, they don't come back to their natural or original state. So when someone relapses, it's like they take a drink, they take a hit, whatever, the body, the brain signals that they need that dose that they were getting before, whether it was a year, 10 years. That's why,
the first time you got
cigarette
drunk
smokers, like they quit smoking for 10, 20 years. They smoke another cigarette. In a few days, they're back to smoking a pack of cigarettes. You know, that's why. I read that, I was like, okay, well, there's one like really obvious reason because of the depths to which I went in my substance abuse. Like I was like, if I go back to that after being sober, like I could die. Like, it's very, my body will not process it. It's very simple. I could die. After that, there's nature and nurture, right? And the natural side of it, the genetic side of it, I mean, that again runs deep. But the nurture side of it too is something that, I grew up around a lot of people who like to party, and especially in the summertime and growing up in Montana, we would have family coming all summer to visit. We have a family cabin there, and it was their vacation. So for my brother and I, it was like a 3-4 month vacation.
Wow.
Everyone's partying, we're partying. And I actually started partying quite late. I had my first exposure to alcohol and cigarettes very, very young, my first consumption, but I didn't really start partying until after I stopped playing football. But just the mentality, like the acceptance of substance use, and it wouldn't be called abuse by most people who abuse it, but the normalizing of like, oh yeah, you just drink a bottle of wine to yourself. Like my thing, and this is just, it started to freak me out towards the end when I would be around people who refer to their preferred alcohol as like, oh, this is my bottle, like this is my vodka, my gin, like it's a possessive, like it's like an identity thing.
And I think a lot of people will also not only hide it, as you said, I think that's extremely common, which is why they get to that point in the first place, but also justify it.
Yeah, the justification.
I had a hard day, a hard week. I had a really hard week.
Real, I'm
Friday
fine,
night,
I'm functioning, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And, that's not for me to say. I can really only control what I'm doing. But they're just, you lose that, as you said, that aperture gets smaller and smaller the more one consumes and abuses things, especially things that are, either mind altering or in the case of alcohol as well, like it's a neurotoxin. You're just poisoning yourself.
That was another
you're
thing
poisoning yourself.
From the Huberman podcast was that exact point. And I was like, he's like, there's no other really way to describe it in terms of its impact on your body. It's poison. And then, of course, there's all this. What's confusing for people, of course, is like culturally, you and I both lived in my case, worked as well in Europe, lived in Italy. I lived in Milan. I come from an Italian family. So many cultures embrace alcohol, not just for the quiet moments when we're relaxing at home or having a nice meal, but the weddings and the ceremonies and the celebrations and the champagne and the partying and the whole thing. So it's everywhere. And I wanted to know if you have any comments about how you've managed to continue to kind of show up and let's say have a good time, which ultimately, like alcohol and other things there's a payoff. There's some kind of payoff, right? So it's like, I can relax, I can be myself, I can have less social anxiety, any number of things. But how do you now, as someone who's now been sober for how many years?
7.5. Amazing. Yeah.
You know it to the day?
Yeah. October 3rd.
Wow.
2016.
Wow.
Which is pretty interesting. 10 months exactly after I took my first yoga class.
Incredible.
It's pretty quick program
exactly,
to get you from quick program to get you from self-destruction to sobriety.
It's really a wonderful endorsement for yoga.
Yeah. I have not gone to AA. My brother has very successfully amongst, proper therapy and things like that. I think it can be very, very powerful for people from what I hear. But yeah, I found, as I've done many times in my life, I found my own way to get through what I was going through.
Yeah, no, ultimately, this is something I learned in coaching. I learned, as I've been learning the the kind of the profession of coaching and all the different, there's all sorts of different types of coaches and styles and formats. And one of the things I learned is you can't coach someone who doesn't want to be coached, and you can't get someone to get help if they don't want help. They have to opt in. You have to, so people can help you. And like my whole thing was, what's difficult about addiction though is that some people get so down the hole that they need to get, someone's got to shake them up basically. Yeah. So that's always the difficult thing, where you get the intervention, you get the, the ultimatums, the people, the relationships that fall apart.
Yeah. And I mean, as many people say, as Rich Roll has said, right? I mean, you lose a partner, you lose everything, but that aperture is so tight that it just doesn't really matter. You have that thing that's guiding you. It's your North Star, but it's just a toxic North Star with addiction, right? And that's when, at some point we have to remember that, and this is where I really try to show grace with people who are struggling with addiction, is like, addiction is not a choice. I didn't choose to be an alcoholic. I didn't choose to be addicted to Coke for the time that I was. My family, they didn't choose to be alcoholics. And we didn't get to it, but this comes back to the trauma, right? And this is where I think Gabor Mate has really hit it right on the head, is like, this trauma also was not a choice. And this trauma is, it's generations deep. Yep. And I mean, by generations, that's not just like grandma and grandpa. It's like great grandma and grandpa, and
hundreds of every
thousands of years,
ancestor, right? We all have had lived through and passed down.
And I mean, we can go on a whole other layer of this with like karmic experiences and karmic lives, and maybe that's for another time. But what I do know and trust, and perhaps one of the most things I'm most proud of, is that not only myself but my brother as well, like, we have broken that intergenerational and karmic chain of alcoholism and toxic addiction. I still love dark chocolate, man, and I love coffee, but like, I'm good with that. If that's if those are my addictions now, like, I think I'm not better. I'm not better than anyone, but I'm doing a lot better than I was. Yeah. And I think that brings me to, brings us back to why I do what I do, and why I trust so much in teaching as a teacher, because teaching is about giving. And I just want to give and show people that they have the opportunity to change. It's never too late, and that the things that happen to them are not their fault. They are not those things, and it is a choice, and it's very hard to see when that aperture is closed down so tightly, but there is always a choice, and sometimes the best choice is to let that shit go.
What I've learned is you need all these tools. You need to kind of bolster your support system with everything that you might find that some types of, let's say, breath work or yoga or cycling are outlets that can take that energy that's otherwise going in the drink, coming from the drink, being resolved through the drink, and then kind of fill the need in a way and resolve the trauma thing, and we shouldn't underestimate that breaking the cycle thing, as you said, is one of the things you're most proud of, because it's freaking hard. You have thousands of years of stuff that maybe has never been resolved. And that's a big deal. So that now, if you have kids in the future, or if you are an uncle in the future, or you're a teacher now, but all those things mean that you can not pass it on, which is typically how, in a lot of ways, addiction passes on. It's a generational thing. So my question for you is, who do you want to thank as relates to your key teachers, the key people that kind of picked you up when you were down or believed in you, or starting back with your experience in Utah, where the family that you were you're taken under their wings, respected you?
There's a lot of people. I would, I guess, going all the way back, I would start with and I don't think I've ever said this, but with the community where I grew up in Montana. even though I left early, it was and still is like such a wholesome place.
You gotta take me there sometime. I would love to go. I love Yellowstone.
Yeah, I think it's incredible, and those, like, I feel so welcomed when I come back there. I spent this past summer 2023, I went back with a friend. We met there in West Yellowstone and did a 4-day, 400-mile bike ride around Yellowstone Park in southwest Montana for his 50th birthday.
That explains the calves.
yeah, thank you. The down home just friendliness of people from West Yellowstone and Montana as a whole, like, I've never experienced it anywhere else.
Wow.
And that's very much rooted in me. So yeah, all of them.
Love that.
Teachers I learned more in that school, this small K through 12 school in West Yellowstone, than I don't remember learning anything outside of the my athletic endeavors in high school in Utah.
Wow.
End of junior year, senior year. I don't remember learning anything. I learned so much in this the teachers cared so much in West Yellowstone.
To just sort of wrap up here, what are you doing now, and how would you like people to maybe get in contact with you in terms of your work? And you have so many great things going on. You have so many dimensions to you that are interesting, that I think people might enjoy following you and supporting you, and potentially even taking some of your classes.
Yeah, definitely. Before that, there's a lot of people who I could thank, but I'm just gonna say my parents, because they really showed us how to appreciate the simple pleasures in life, and I mean that wholeheartedly. Just the quality of life itself, and that's why they both ended up in Montana from other places, and really what I lean into as a philosophy of my own now is this kind of idea of less is more.
Fewer better things for sure, more open space, more time to enjoy, laughing and eating and just being still and things like that. So that's over.
Yeah, that's an important one. But from there, in LA, I'm teaching in studio public classes at Child's Pose LA and Light on Lotus, and then soon to be also Hume LA and Venice. Gonna, along with like the Monday through Friday schedule, which you can find if you want to check out Instagram. I'll be doing basically every other Friday soon some sort of workshop at either one of those studios for the foreseeable future. So really kind of building, community type environments and making it just as much about that and connecting with people off of the mat, but in studio, as it is the work on the mat, the movement, the breath, meditation stuff. So those are the studio spots. If you like to ride bikes, let me know. We can go ride.
I told you like 2 days ago. I was like,
a long time. There's a great shop in Venice called Luft that I tend to ride out of, and have actually done some yoga work with them, which is really cool. Other than that, yeah, just reach out. I'm doing a lot of my focus right now outside of studio is working with young people, teens, working with breath and movement to kind of help regulate the nervous system and get off the phone, out of that frenetic digital environment, and then athletes as well. That same type of goal to use these holistic practices to better their athletic undertakings and make them stronger mentally and physically.
Yep, in the workplace and
everywhere.
At home and the grocery
everywhere.
store.
And as I think we touched on, I've finally grown to really accept and embody this diversity of my experiences and the things that I still like to undertake, and I want other people to know that too. It doesn't have to just be one thing. It doesn't have to be black or white. They said, he said, she said, this is what's supposed to be. Like, go be who you want to be, Don't let anyone tell you not to.
Love that. I co-sign all of that. I think you are a true Renaissance man. You're a terrific representation of healthy masculinity, something we talked about at the beginning there. And an inspiration for me, not just as a teacher, but now friend. And you got to get me into cycling because I'm
Let's go.
dying to get back on. Definitely mountain biking, but I think road biking has in my future too. So
yeah,
or cycling.
I mean,
I got to get all
I
the.
just I feel so fortunate, so grateful that I can be in a place like LA where we can pursue multiple undertakings at an elite level, if I dare say. You know, I'm not, you know,
Well, this
elite
is
is for you to decide, for one to decide, but you know, no matter where you want to go with things in LA, one can go there. All you got to do is put yourself out there, and that's a beautiful thing, you know.
Yeah, I'm with you. Awesome. Peter, this has been so fun. I really appreciate your time. It's been a good conversation that I think can really help and inspire a lot of people. So thank you.
Thank you, brother.